continue with 10.34b. This is going to be direct continuation with the previous. And I was discussing how the reflective consciousness, term I took from Richard E. Lind, sort of absorbs everything in each moment and almost by magic gets recreated the very next moment. It springs to life once more and needs to be recreated every singular moment. One could say this is an action of the contradictory tendency, or the law of contradiction, or what contradiction does or do. And by sheer contradiction, existence, so to speak, in the term beings of Heidegger, spring into a sort of obfuscating, opaque mood. This is not getting into thinginess of the world. I would later get into those different terms like dinge, but here in this case there is no getting into the thing. It does not enter in. It's perpetually outside, and it has this automation of it. Automation because it gets recreated every singular moment. It is never the same. You, in that sense, are not the same from moment to moment. You have no continuity. The continuity was the most singular, important, or characterizing aspect of heart consciousness. Heart consciousness is continuous over time, but also continuous over levels. Heart consciousness allowed, I put that in past tense, allowed several levels, several thinkings going on at the very same time. This could be compared to some degree doing different things at the same time, but this is more that you can actually inhabit different things at the same time, something that is more than ever a necessity in this modern day, but is becoming less and less possible because of the reflective consciousness tendency to suck up everything. There is no remainder left to have awareness. It is a blocking out of everything, not being there. It could also be in a advanced, when it advances too far, it could be a way of leaving reality altogether and get habituated with not having access to the body. Here is where abstract thinking is. This is the area of intellectualization. This is the awareness. Up here we have the automated random process of every moment producing the reflective consciousness. Never ever the same. No continuity, no permanence, constantly recreating itself, sucking up energy, sucking up presencing. Perception disappear. We become these modern day dwellers of dull perception. This is taking away the hand. As we've seen in these experiments, especially coming from Ian McGilchrist, the dullness of the body comes together with reflective consciousness. Actually, a reflective consciousness can be produced in a healthy individual, a balanced individual, by giving the person partial anesthesia. Part of the brain anesthetized and the body put into sort of anesthesial effect, called in Swedish bedövning. That person will, to some extent, it doesn't really copy the tendency, but to some extent it will show up the same tendencies of reflective consciousness, of no longer perceiving the full amount of flavors, visual area, visual perception, tactile perception, kinesthesia, obviously because of the anesthesia, but more interesting, it seemed to work to some extent in the very same way as the reflective consciousness. And pretty soon getting used to the fact that no exteriority, that of intellectualization or analyzing, thinking, comes into action anymore. And all of a sudden, a sort of a habit can be established where there is no longer any progress in knowledge, knowing, understanding, perceiving, being able to project into the unknown in front of you, or no longer being able to go into what has happened already. Retention. Of course, in modern day and time, we glorify this reflective consciousness, even giving it the name soul or spirit, or something that we want to keep, and we get worried it will not survive death, will not survive the next moment even, I would say. I would say not being enduring, not being permanent is the very foundation of the reflective consciousness. The constantly newness, and always already going in different directions. And I also see how this fits neatly with affordances, because this person, the anesthetized person, do not interact with affordances. There is no Sorge, to use a Heideggerian word. And if you don't interact with the world, therefore there can be no language, no thinking. A certain particular logic has been put in place, but it's not the openness of the before with the source of logic. It's a diminished logic that doesn't allow for newness, creativity. It is the reflective consciousness who is the namer of the voice of the friend. He, she, it is the one who fleshes out the voice, puts a dress on the voice, and, I would say, as I mentioned before, giving it exclusiveness as what the reflective consciousness think is a helping detail. Thinking that by excluding plurality, singularity could be handed out, where in actual an openness for both singularity and plurality goes into the before, and only there can you be decisively pointing out singularity without excluding plurality. You can compare it pointing with a whole hand, which I would say is more effective, or just using a portion of the finger. This is exclusiveness, excluding. It becomes less, it's less hand. Yes, it is actually that literal. It is quantum mechanics that shows that we can have both at the same time. And it seemed to some degree be able to speak on the terms of the reflective consciousness, to show to it both ways are possible. And what area of knowledge could be better than physics, technology? Few, if any, reflective consciousness does not acknowledge physics as the absolute measurer. And that has to do with a conformist attitude within the reflective consciousness. It's conformal, and since in the affordances of the everyday world, classical physics is firmly established, this is the reason only quantum mechanics can be the starting point. It's dearly needed, not something that could be without. It works in the field where the reflective consciousness actually get a lot of its argument from, or proof, so to speak. And first then can it start, because there is no loss when you go over to quantum mechanics. You see, in all aspects there is a gain. Everything that we have today, when we are in the reflective consciousness, is utterly stemming from this greater openness of possibilities. The before logic, and the before logic is something closer to para-consistent logic, could be said to be halfway to where logic actually stems from. A place where you need to be to control and use those features of logic. Whereas if you are only in the side product or the byproduct, you have to handle the spoils. And the spoils are, without a doubt, the conformist classical logical tool, not good enough to be used for thinking. It is far from thinking. It's one partial, instantaneous take of the reflective consciousness that creates a logic that is limitation, because it's second hand. It's also secondary. It is not the first place taker, where it should be to be more powerful. It's a little bit the sign I saw many years ago. Go and buy ice cream here. You can have your pick as long as you choose strawberry pop. That was funny, but this is exactly how this classical logic works. It tries to sort of convince you into that you have a choice, whereas classical logic is the choicelessness. It's the inability to reach into the deeper foundations of the energy that is logic, where it stems from. So you have only the shadow to handle, no longer accessing the deeper. I would name some obstacles in how it could be stopped entering to this absolute deconstruction that is quantum mechanics, the opener to be able to deconstruct whatever you want, whatever I want, whatever we want, to a greater openness, but also to, for the first time, I would say, something that only quantum mechanics can handle out. That is mutual understandable, or understandability, to use phrase Gibsonian in taste. The first one, I would say, reflective consciousness has been rushing in the head of the Newtonian persona for ages. So there are plenty of historical and emotional attachments to the perception. So we make our perception conform to Newtonian praxis. So we don't let perception be, we make perception conform to the Newtonian praxis. So that you get what the reflective consciousness, the proponent and the argumenter for this diminished half world, you get non-contradictory and you get logical solutions. This shows why this ludicrous mission that was handed out at the Paris conference at 1900 by Hilbert didn't really serve a purpose for a sound mind. What was it to achieve? No progress in mathematics, just this stalemate, this stopping of everything. Someone once said, you get what you want. In this case, it is absolutely true. We get it because we want it. And we will continue to want it until we are shown out of the cave or out of this locked room. So there is a double take. Reflective consciousness construct this diminished logic of classical logic, but it is also constructed of it. It is dependent on classical logic, the law of the excluded middle, for its existence, if you like that. That existence is of beings, ontic, but it also creates it at the very same time. And this is a good hint, because according to its own thinking, that should not be possible. It should be either the other one first and then the other one, not simultaneous. But that simultaneity shows it is a sort of a lie. It makes up its own origin. It doesn't have an origin. Why or what would that origin be? It constantly asks. This is obviously the reason of Albert Einstein being completely against quantum mechanics, because there would not be his reflective consciousness anymore, and he would some reason have to go into a way that seemed like insanity, had the flavor of insanity. Yes, that is exactly what Albert Einstein thought, felt, experienced. Insanity. You don't go into the area of insanity. It is Newtonian physics that put the fear in us. It makes it being a semaphore that shows red, being an alarm bell that says don't go into that, radioactive, or even worse. Don't go into the area where contradictions are allowed. Well, a way of understanding that, to make that furious defendant mechanism to soften, is to make it understand that there is something before, from where this came, and to understand that they spring into existence absolutely simultaneous. That can show that there is a lie built in here, and that lie can be shown to exist and being reinvented every moment. And once you point to it, there will be an openness, and you would see those alarm bells, this fear of the apeiron side. And that's the only thing that can make a change. Until the fear disappears, you cannot convince yourself into letting the fear go. There can be no propaganda for letting the fear go. It is only when you realize it's all coming from this greater openness, this vaster, wider, taking in everything, that you will relax and let space be in. Otherwise, the logic of exclusiveness would say don't take in the space around you, because then you're going to disappear. Because Your existence is carved out of this greater openness. But once you realize it's coming from a greater place and all the goodies are there, you will put the defense mechanism aside. You will relax into this. Because this is the apeiron. This is knowledge. This is true laws. There's a system. And it's a true system. It's not a Newtonian system. A system that actually works. The second take. This will not change easily. It's an ingrained habit that gets us further and further down into the spiral. And it could be very hard to go into the why question. Because all the what's and the how's and the where are occupying the mind, keeping the mind so occupied that it cannot reach into the deeper layers. It's a constant occupation. And I heard this the clearest from a visitor to one of my lectures many years ago, well, a couple of years ago. And he asked, even if I relax completely, and I know that I am completely and absolutely safe, lying down, doing the relaxation, I think he talked about yoga exercise, it was still the mind going on, frequently occupying everything, and it was this sense of busyness. This will constantly go on whether you are situated on a tropical island, completely relaxed, until that moment you understand that busyness is not so that you don't stop, and then you might realize that contradictions can be allowed. It's like a busyness that constantly tries to establish the law of the excluded middle. And therefore it can't calm down, because then the apeiron is coming. You don't want to go into that nasty place. You don't know where it is, or what it is, or how it is. But by constantly asking yourself those questions, you hinder yourself from understanding. And that's the purpose of the reflective consciousness. Stopping understanding. It's sort of a habit that doesn't have a purpose. It doesn't have a why. Isn't it obvious now in this neurological take what Heidegger means with a why? By constantly asking all the other questions, you can keep it busy so the why never comes up. A little bit like you're going somewhere and you lost your way, but there are 5 people or 10 people following you. Maybe you have a bus. By keeping them occupied by the surroundings, asking what is that, and where is that situated, you can keep them busy, and they will not ask you where the bus is going. This is very similar. It's the busyness of the what, where, how that keeps the whole thing going, and then the brain will actually change, and it will be defect to some degree. It will be with these fast twitch neurons, the equivalence of fight and flight response of the muscles in the brain, will stop you from being able to think, which is the purpose of the reflective consciousness. So it's both the problem and the solver of not taking care of the problem. It's not possible for anything not to work in the quantum mechanics. Everything works there. All plans, all retention, you never ever fail with anything. That will happen in quantum mechanics, because that is from where everything is stemming. Every aspect. That's an interesting thing. By showing that quantum mechanics can inhabit Newtonian mechanics, it's also shown that it's derivative, it's coming from quantum mechanics. So Newtonian mechanics is the second-hand product. It's less flexible, and it covers such a small area, whereas quantum mechanics covers everything. And this is the last one, and this is the more of a motivator. Nothing will happen until you understand the process. You won't accept any benefits. You will actually reject them beforehand. It's also the work of the reflective consciousness. But it could be helping to mention what you can gain. You will gain absolutely everything. Nothing will be lost, but you will also gain an immensity of other things. Pretension, retention, understanding. You will become perceptible, understand your own thinking, being able to control your own thinking. You will have a permanent awareness that goes from one moment to another without a problem. It's like buying a fantastic motor car like a Ferrari and comparing it to the diesel engine of an old Opel from 1960s. Maybe a Opel Kadett. I used to own one myself, or was it a Skona? It did hardly work. But once you get used to something, you know what you have, but you don't know what you don't have, and you're stuck to that. That's not the whole explanation. There is an absolute fear of the other thing. And it's the fear itself that keeps it going. There is an understanding lacking, but that understanding cannot come from within. It has to come from without, because that's the only way you can attack this. The first step is the conformist Newtonian mechanics. There is no other way into change. Then everything could happen. Repetition will down in the window. There will be no regurgitating of the same old stuff. Academic thinking will be replaced by intellectual life. Repetitive automatic actions like the Yale School of Literary Criticism will be changed to active thinking process that is constantly creative, sharp, and being able, in contrast to academia, that can only be either or, either too general or either too distinct. This one can be distinct and general at the same time and beat everything about academia, both in sharpness, distinctiveness, and generality, on both sides, because they are both stemming from the same point of view. There is no loss in quantum mechanics. You go back to the birthplace from everything. It's the same thing if you take water from a stream, but that stream actually comes from its source, which is even fresher because it hasn't passed through the ground or plants or plant material, compost, humus, defecating animals. That's the source. Quantum mechanics brings you to the source of everything. Therefore, it cannot be any loss. The loss is when drinking from the stream, miles downwards where it's polluted, diluted, not as clear anymore, not having the same information level. And it doesn't matter if you're working in system theory, medicine, neurology, philosophy, it cannot matter, because all preemptive divisions will cut out by having the whole observance, letting that be. Sharpness can be. There is no sharpness in academia. It's always blunt, never hits the target ever. It's like playing darts with an eye shield, not being able to see. That is the case. This is what Newtonian mechanics does. It's the lack of sharpness, lack of accuracy. It simply doesn't have enough foundation. Yes, quantum mechanics works everywhere. One could say the reflective consciousness is not interested in real life. And it's true. Instead, it builds dreams, because it cannot have reality, real satisfaction, perception, sensuous delight, happiness coming from the real body, None of that could be had in the reflective consciousness. Therefore, it automatically goes into dream state, where it dreams up things that to replace real experience. This is why we turn into a nation of daydreamers, mind wanderers. Without no proper access to the real world, we dream up what we miss. We think about grand dinners, but we can't have them because it's like we don't have any mouth anymore. So this is the dream state, and in the end, we prefer the dream state. You start to think, I have no power. This is one of the lies from the reflective consciousness. You have no power, everything is deterministic. It cannot be deterministic. Quantum mechanics is not a proponent of determinism. Its foundation is the why, the choice. Either you choose an instrument that gives a wave, or you choose an instrument that gives particle. The choice is yours. That choice can never cease to exist. There can't be a machine that chooses for you. The machine can be said to make the superposition collapse, but you choose the machine, you choose the way, and that will always be. That is the Necker cube of the whole thing. And I think the Necker cube is such a nice illustration of our choice in reality and our ability to inhabit several levels at the very same time, and that it could be an awareness, something that Richard E. Ling calls a heart consciousness, that is permanent, that doesn't need to be reinvented every second and never is the same. This random take of reality that doesn't give you the sustenance, the joy, and the predictive power. I think that's one of the reasons we get even more stuck. We get afraid, we make bad choices, we're bound to make bad choices. Newtonian classical physics, outside of bridge building, house building, will be a bad method for making choices. Therefore, the result will be horrible, you'll be scared, and you have no other way to go. You stick even firmer to this. It becomes a dream in itself. But your predictions will never be good in this reflective consciousness. There's no happenstance when reflective consciousness was becoming more established, something that Heidegger points out, when the Latinization of the Greek culture started. It was a downfall. They never had any high culture in Greece anymore after that. It slowly disappeared, becoming less and less, becoming eaten up by the Ottoman Empire, and in the end it was just Constantinople left of the Latinized Greek culture. This is the take from Heidegger. In 1453, even that was gone. That's not a minor factor in history. That is Geschichte. That had real and horrific consequences on our way of being. And I'm quite sure that would not have happened without the Latinization of the Greek Empire. That's my view anyway. Well, the Necker cube, I would put in a link to the Necker cube there. It's just absolutely wonderful illustration of how it really works. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye. Maybe a little view. It's oregano here. Chives. Mint. Isop. Dacopa, I don't know what they call it in English. And here's some more mint and some tomato plants.